Playing, listening to, and creating music involves practically every cognitive function. In this article, Dr. Robert Zatorre, the author, explains how music can teach us about speech, brain plasticity, and even the origins of emotion. Dr. Zatorre is one of the world's leading scientists and expert on music cognition. He has worked in the field for almost 30 years and is the co-director of the International Laboratory for Brain, Music, and Sound Research in Montreal, Canada. The article does an excellent job of summing up the relation of music with speech, development, and emotion. The review rightly states that we often tend to consider art and culture from a humanistic or historical perspective rather than a biological one. Yet, the products of human cognition must have their origin in the function and structure of the human nervous system. As such, they should be able to yield valuable scientific insights. This line of reasoning is nowhere more evident than in the contemporary interest in the neuroscience of music. Music provides a tool to study numerous aspects of neuroscience, from motor skill learning to emotion. Indeed, from a psychologist's point of view, listening to and producing music involves a tantalizing mix of practically every human cognitive function. One of the oldest techniques used to understand music cognition includes studying the consequences of brain lesions occasionally. Lesions of certain auditory cortical regions result in an unusual phenomenon, a highly selective problem with perceiving and interpreting music, termed amusia. People with this type of damage have no problem speaking or understanding music or making sense of everyday sounds, but they cannot notice wrong notes inserted into tunes or recognize even the most familiar melody. Even more surprising is that a minority of otherwise normal individuals appear to be born with the same inability to recognize tunes. In some cases, the deficit seems to run in families, suggesting a genetic component. Music and speech. Scientists have long wondered whether musical ability is somehow an extension of speech. Many have argued for this on the reasonable grounds that music and speech share several formal similarities. So researchers have tried using various techniques to determine the extent to which the processing of music and that of speech share neural resources. The results so far are somewhat conflicting, but also intriguing. There are also many case reports of individuals who have lost their speech functions after extensive damage to speech regions in the left cerebral hemisphere, yet continue to show intact high-level musical function. For example, the Russian composer Vissarion Shabalin. These data suggest that music and speech processing do not use completely overlapping neural substrates. But neuroimaging studies indicate that some functions such as syntax may require common neural resources for both speech and music. But the data from which we have drawn these conclusions have limitations. While some data was collected from descriptive and anecdotal case studies, other data was obtained from neuroimaging, which can be notoriously difficult to interpret. The authors suggest that a more systematic study of the various subcomponents that contribute to various aspects of musical function, such as fine-grained pitch processing, might help better resolve these limitations. Music and development. The review teaches us that babies are surprisingly sophisticated mini-musicians. They are able to distinguish different scales and chords and show preferences for consonant over dissonant combinations. For example, any mother can attest to the way an infant will respond to the pitch and rhythm of her voice. All this evidence supports the general idea that ability to perceive and process music is not some recent add-on to our cognition, but that it has been around long enough to be expressed from the earliest stages of our neural development. The question that researchers are asking these days is, although nearly everyone seems to have sophisticated neural systems, that allow them to perceive music and reproduce musical patterns by singing, why is not everyone able to play the piano like Yanni? And the answer to this question seems to lie in early musical training. New evidence suggests that genetics also plays a role. For example, it is now clear that absolute pitch cannot develop without some musical training, and critically, the exposure must happen during childhood. Past the age of 12 to 15, and it is essentially impossible to learn it. Another example is that areas of the motor cortex corresponding specifically to the fingers of the left hand show an enhanced electrical response among violin players. These changes are directly related to the age at which training is begun. Those who began studying music in early childhood show the most extensive modification to brain response, whereas those who waited until after puberty show much less. Music and emotion. The relation between music and emotion has received very little attention in the neuroscience community, yet many questions remain unanswered, such as, why does one feel so relaxed when listening to their favorite song after a tiring day? Although answers to such questions remain unanswered, many possible theories exist. One hypothesis is that music drives the body. So loud, rhythmic, fast music tends to make you feel lively or even want to dance, whereas slow, soft music leads to calmness and even sadness. A possible explanation is that these effects could be mediated through sensory motor feedback circuits, which have been much discussed in neurophysiology, that is, through the so-called mirror neuron system. Another intriguing response that the body feels when listening to music is the chills down the spine effect. When listeners experience the chills, neuroimaging shows that the brain areas recruited include regions thought to be involved in mechanisms of reward and motivation. Examples are the basal forebrain and certain brainstem nuclei, along with cortical areas involved in emotional evaluation, such as the orbitofrontal and insular regions. These circuits are similar to those involved in mediating responses to biologically rewarding stimuli, such as food or sexual stimuli. But why should music, an abstract pattern of sound, have any commonality at all with such survival-related systems? It is a stretch to suggest that music is essential for life or reproduction. Maybe music and all art in a way manages to transcend mere perception precisely because it contacts our more primordial neurobiology. To caricature the idea, we can think of the neurocortex as being able to analyze relations and notice patterns, but then this processed information interacts with the emotion evaluation system, which in turn leads to pleasure or sadness, fear and excitement, and so forth. The vagueness of these concepts indicates how far we are from having anything like a model of the processes going on. Although an optimist might point out that even being able to talk about it, although in unclear terms, shows how far we have come.